If you are between 1,000 and 2,000 in chess.com rapid ratings, I have some tips for you. In this video, I am going to be giving some advice for every single rating range from 1,000 all the way up to 2,000, things that I wish I had known along my path, and these are all based off of games that I myself have played. There's going to be lots of examples in this video, so without further ado, let's get into it. If you are in the 1,100 rating range, it's time to start playing better defense. So that means looking for your opponent's potential checks and trying your best to stop them. And if you don't do that, this is what might happen to you. So my opponent found this nice check here because I wasn't defending against it. King moves up. Okay, the knight comes, attacks the queen. My queen has to move. Check with the bishop. Check with the knight. Check with the knight. And check with the queen for checkmate. So as you can see, once your opponent starts getting checks on you, things can spiral out of control really quickly. So if you can prevent those checks at all costs, that will really help your chess. If you are in the 1,200 rating range, you need to start working more on your counting. So that means learning to calculate through the end of a forced sequence of captures so you can evaluate whether or not you can put a piece safely on a square, or if you need to add a defender to a piece that's being attacked. Very simple example of this is in this position, my opponent played the move knight e4. This is a counting mistake because it's only defended once and it's being attacked twice. So that means that after all the captures, these are forcing moves, all these captures are said and done, we are going to be up a pawn. We also have other threats happening, but that's besides the point. The idea is that when you move a piece to a square, or if one of your pieces is being attacked, it's important to make sure that you're not going to lose any material or that you can win material at the end of a forced capture sequence. If you're in the 1,300 rating range, I would highly recommend to stop trading off pieces just for the sake of trading pieces. I see this at a lot of different rating levels, but this one especially, I saw moves like this being played so much for no reason. Like, okay, I understand. We're doubling the pawns, yes, but we are giving up the bishop pair. We've just developed it just to give it away for this knight that wasn't really doing anything, when we could have continued to add pressure with a move like knight e5 and possibly won a pawn on this square rather than just doubling the pawns. So you want to get as much bang for your buck as possible and not just trade off your really strong bishop for a knight. This is the kind of bad trade that you will see a lot at these levels, and if you're able to keep your bishop pair at this level, it will often come in handy later in the game when you do end up trading more pieces off. So if you're going to make a trade of pieces, please promise me that it's going to be for a good reason, and that reason cannot just be, okay, ooga booga, I want to double pawns. If you're in the 1,400 rating range, make a point of looking for forks in your games, especially knight forks. These can come out of nowhere, and if you are really good at spotting forks, you're going to find a lot of them. And a good way to do this is to kind of memorize the piece placement that make forks possible. So for example, this one, if we can get a knight here, that will be a fork. This will also help you with defense, so looking for those patterns of piece placement will help you to not make moves like this that will allow your opponent to fork you. So in this position, of course, we can capture on f6, and after the bishop takes back, we can capture again with our other knight that was covering that square, forking the king and the rook. If you're able to familiarize yourself with these kinds of piece placements, this one or even this one, this is another forkable position if we can get a knight here. This will help you a lot, again, both in defense and in the attack that you want to go for. If you are in the 1,500 rating range, I would recommend doing a deep dive into the pin tactic. So the reason we're looking at these specific tactics in more detail is that they come up a lot in games, and if you make a point of really looking at positions with pins or with forks like we previously looked at, this will help you to find them in your own games and also understand more positional ideas of like, okay, we are pinned, we probably want to get out of that pin so that our opponent doesn't have the chance to find tactics on us, but it will also help you find adjacent tactics to the pin when they come up in your own games. So for example, here we have a discovered attack by giving this check with the bishop, suddenly moving out of the way for the rook to look at that queen. So after the king takes, we're going to win material and hopefully go on to win the game. If you are in the 1,600 rating range, I would recommend you to take note that pawns start to matter a lot more at this level, so you can't just be giving up pawns. And it's also important to always assume that you're going to get an endgame, so that earlier in the game you're not messing up your pawn structure too much. And then once you get to the endgame, it's important not to lose focus. So for me at this level, it was important for me to start studying more endgame stuff, like theoretical endgame stuff, just so I felt more comfortable. You might already feel comfortable enough in the endgame, but if you're anything like me, you'll notice that this is a place that you need to start studying a little bit more. And again, once you get to the endgame, it's important to stay focused. Just to tab through this game, this was the losing move that I played in this game, and the reason for that is that my opponent can take this pawn with check, and then it's easy for them to come over and get rid of my other pawns. That the structure is just really bad, and my rook is not there in time to help out with holding on to the pawns. So my opponent was able to take advantage of my doubled pawns and my kind of bad rook placement and get a passer going on the other side of the board. If you are in the 1700 rating range, I would recommend that you focus a lot on king safety. And as you can see in this position, I was playing black here in this game, and my king is quite unsafe in comparison to my opponent's king. And the reason for that is that white has a whole bunch of pieces, that are all sort of aiming in the vicinity of my king, whereas this nice pawn wall is keeping my opponent's king very safe, and I don't have any pieces over there. In addition, my queen is much too far away to help stave off any of these kind of checkmating attacks. And so after my opponent sacrifices a rook to open up my king, you can really see the difference in king safety already in this position. And after just a few more checks, my opponent goes on to pick up the rook and will shortly go on to win the game. If you are in the 1800 rating range, in my experience, you will start to see more of your mistakes coming in the form of missed wins. And the way to fix this is just to keep your tactical vision very sharp. So going back to all those basics you already know, always looking for your checks, captures, and threats. And here in this position, we can find a really nice tactical sequence by capturing here, sacrificing our bishop, but then if the king takes, we're going to pick up the queen with this knight fork. So being on the lookout for these kinds of tactics can often make the difference between a completely winning game and one where you are just getting smothered to death. If you're in the 1900 rating range, be hyper aware of your opponent's resources. That means don't get lazy and assume that you've won the game just because you are up some material. If your opponent is down material, that means they are going to be trying every possible way to turn the game in their favor. And sometimes that means doing crazy things. You need to shut down all of their possible resources before you start looking for ways to simplify and things like that. So in this position, obviously, we're going to be up material. We've just forked these two rooks, and I will just tap through this game very quickly so that you can see how black is able to turn this around simply because, well, a bit of a lack of patience on my part. I was also down quite a bit of time in this rapid game. But you can see that just because you're up material doesn't mean that your opponent should necessarily resign. And after just a few impatient moves, suddenly black is winning here. So there's no reason for you to slow down and stop calculating and stop actually thinking just because you are up material. If you are in the 2000 rating range, which is actually about my level, my rapid rating is around 2100 at the time I'm making this video, but this is something that I am continuing to work on as well. My advice to you and to myself is you need to get used to calculating sacrifices that open up your king. And also, along with that, don't underestimate the value of a passed pawn. And this position exemplifies both of these perfectly. My opponent has just sacrificed, oh my goodness, my arrows, their knight. This actually doesn't do much, but I didn't calculate it properly and assumed that taking back was not actually going to be a problem, but it is because it allows my opponent to capture on e6, and after just a few more checks, create this passed pawn. My queen off in the middle of nowhere is really no help. So after a few captures and checks, it's clear that there's no way for me to stop my opponent from promoting that passed pawn, and the tide of the game turned simply because I didn't properly calculate a sacrifice that would put my king's safety in jeopardy. Thanks so much for watching. If you're new around here, don't forget to subscribe. It helps me out a lot. And if you're not new around here, I encourage you to share this video with anybody who you think might benefit from these tips. I'll see you soon.